Hello, my name's David Runciman, and this is Past, Present, Future, the History of Ideas podcast. Today's episode is a live recording that took place earlier this month at the Cheltenham Science Festival. I'm in conversation with Jimmy Wales, the founder and still the driving force behind Wikipedia, and we're talking about what we can learn from Wikipedia, not just what we can learn from an online encyclopedia, but what Wikipedia teaches us about democracy, technology, and the potential and the pitfalls of putting your trust in people. Hello, good evening. Thank you very much for coming to this event. We're going to be talking about trust, democracy, and Wikipedia. I think that Jimmy Wales doesn't need any introduction. Let me just say that he is responsible, as the creator, for the greatest scientific, social, democratic experiment of the 21st century, bar none. And
thank you. That was very kind.
And one of the reasons it's the greatest experiment is it is a successful experiment, which not all democratic experiments are. So we're going to talk about some of the themes that are in Jimmy's book, and some of them revolve around questions of trust. But we're also going to talk more broadly about democracy, politics, and all of that. I want to start with the origin story, because I'm sure, like a lot of people, I find the origin story of Wikipedia completely fascinating. In the book, you say that it seemed like a crazy idea, a somewhat crazy idea to you too. I remember, I'm sure everyone remembers, at that time I was working as an academic, the disdain, not to put too fine a point on it, the contempt for the idea that an encyclopedia could be constructed this way. And Jimmy, you started trying to build a different kind of encyclopedia online, Newpedia. So can you just tell us what Newpedia was and when the penny dropped that you could do it this other way? When did you realize it wasn't a crazy idea?
Yeah, so about 2 years before starting Wikipedia, I started this project, Newpedia, and we were thinking of, like, one of the concerns we had is it was inspired by open source software. I saw programmers coming together and collaborating in new ways and sharing their work under a free license. And I thought, that kind of collaboration could go beyond just software into all kinds of cultural works. I had the idea for the encyclopedia, and I thought, that would be great. People could collaborate on that. But in starting, we started with really a top-down model, very, very academic. And we thought in order to be trusted, we needed to be more academic than Britannica. So there was a 7-stage review process to get anything published. You actually had to fax in your CV. I recently gave a talk at NYU, and I realized I better explain what fax is to the college kids.
But
right?
in Cheltenham, you're okay.
In Cheltenham, I'm okay, yes. And so, you had to fax in your CV to prove you were qualified before you could even be sort of offered the opportunity to send in a draft. And I really realized that wasn't going to work. I mean, it wasn't working. We had, in 2 years, we had about 24 articles done. And I realized it was really never going to work when I decided that I would try and write one. I'm like, why is this taking so long? Why is it going so slow? And so recently, Robert Merton had won the Nobel Prize in economics for his work in option pricing theory. I had been an academic. I never finished my PhD, but that's what my specialty was. I had published a paper on index option pricing and so forth. And so I thought, I could write this. And so I started to write, and I had this terrible, writer's block. It was so intimidating because they were going to take, and I'd not been in academia for maybe 4 years at this time, and they're going to take my draft and send it to the most prestigious finance professors they could find to give me feedback and review. And it felt like being back in grad school, which is not generally a very nice experience, but there was no PhD dangling at the end or anything like that. It was just misery. I was like, people aren't going to do this. This isn't fun at all. And so I realized, okay, look, we've got to make it easier. I started thinking about, okay, how do we make it easier? I was kind of waffling. I wasn't quite sure what to do. It was kind of nearly thinking about quitting. And then one of my employees came and showed me the idea of a wiki. So wikis were invented by Ward Cunningham, this lovely programmer, 6 years before. And a wiki just means a website anyone can edit. And wiki is, it's short, it's a Hawaiian word, wiki, which means quick. And the idea is quick collaboration. And so wikis were like very open and so on. But most of the wikis that were out there were kind of like, they were almost like performance art experiments. They deliberately didn't keep any past history. And so they would change sort of dramatically over time, and they didn't really have a purpose and so forth. And so I thought, okay, well, we'll try this. We'll launch the wiki. And actually, I tell the story in the book. It was like my daughter was born, who's also 25 this year. So that was the founding moment. And she was very, very sick in the hospital. And I had to make some decisions. And it was very, very stressful, as you can imagine. She's fine now, by the way. It all worked out great. But I went home to try and quickly search on the internet and like, what can I find that would be good? And it was a mess, you know. I was like, people really do need this. Like, it is something, and also life's too short to keep being a bit waffling about what to do. Let's just try this wiki thing. So I came back to work, and on January 15th, I downloaded some open source wiki software, and I typed "Hello World," which is when you're programmers, when you learn a new language or you do something that's very traditional, you just write a program that can print out "Hello World." It just shows you, oh, I know how to compile a program, I know how to get it to run, I can do a little bit of output. So you're started then. But it sounds very poetic now, you know, Wikipedia's first words, "Hello World." So, and we had more work done in 2 weeks than in almost 2 years. So it was really amazing.
So wiki, the appeal of quick, totally get it. But you were building an encyclopedia, and most people wouldn't think that what you want from an encyclopedia is something like a performance art project.
Right.
In the sense that, as you just described it, fluid, the sourcing keeps changing, doesn't seem to have foundations. And that's the bit, when did you realize it was going to work? Because you must have had your doubts.
Yeah,
Given everybody had doubts about this project.
Well, I always say I'm a pathological optimist. So in general, I think everything's fine all the time, which is definitely not rational, but it's just how my personality is. I'm like, things are great. Yeah. Oh, yeah, well, there's a few bad things, you know, a couple of wars and a lunatic president in the United States, but, you know, the world is great and people are lovely and all that. So I felt it that way. But yeah, I wasn't sure. I didn't know. In fact, I used to wake up in the middle of the night and go downstairs to get on my computer, because when it was very small, I thought somebody's going to come in overnight and just trash the whole thing. And then pretty soon I realized, I'm like, oh, you know what? There's this guy in Australia, and he's on the site when I'm sleeping and looking after things. That's actually kind of cool. And then, you know, we always had the vision of an encyclopedia. So just to tell you the state of the software. So I downloaded this open source. It was a single script. You know, it was very simple to install. You could set your username, but the software had no concept of a password. So I could go on and I could sort of say, oh, this is my username. You could come on tomorrow and say, oh, no, well, that would be my username. And you could just take over my account. Like it was not even a real account. So quickly I was like, that won't work. I'm going to have to, you know, add real passwords. Another innovation in the older wikis, they would talk about article mode versus thread mode. So you would start writing an article and then somebody would come in the middle and ask you a question. And then it would turn into a threaded discussion. And then somebody would come and clean it up and turn it back into an article. A guy I worked with, Tim Schell, said, you know what we should do? We should separate. There should be a talk page and an article page. Wow, like that was an invention. That was one of the brilliant things. So suddenly it was like, no, yeah, the article page should always be an article. And then because we had spent 2 years on Nupedia, we had gathered a bunch of really geeky, a lot of them were academics, a lot of people who were like inspired by the idea, the vision of a free encyclopedia for every single person on the planet in their own language. And we're trying to write it, but found the process intimidating and boring and all of that. But we had spent 2 years talking about what is an encyclopedia, what makes it good, what are the kinds of things. And so that was the early times of like, well, it should be neutral. Like we should try to have a neutral point of view as much as possible. You should have good sources, you should have references, and you can't just use any random thing for reference. You need quality references and so on and so forth. So a lot of those basics, which are really old-fashioned, you know, we had already formed those ideas and had those things going for us, so that once we got started, you could start an article, and it was really fun in the early days. It was really fun. You could be the first person to type, Paris is a city in France, and hit save. And, wow, look at my encyclopedia article. It's so beautiful.
Look how neutral that is.
That's amazing. Like, no one could dispute that. I mean, frankly, people can dispute almost anything, but then somebody would come along, you know, the next day and so on and so forth. Actually, a fun postscript to the story about Robert Merton winning the Nobel Prize in Economics is I happened to be online on the day when Robert Altman won the Nobel Prize in economics, and we didn't have a page about him. So I started the page, and I just typed, "He won the Nobel Prize!" ! Which is not the right way to start a Wikipedia entry. But then I came back, 2 days later, and people had filled in. They had citations to his work and citations to the prize, and there were news articles about him and all that. And it was just fun. Like, it's just really interesting. And, even today, a lot of the people who are editing, they are doing it because it's fun. Like, you go and whatever your nerdy specialty subject is, and there's always something that is astonishing. I mean, go to, I think almost everybody's had this experience. You go to this page. Actually, I was looking at the map to come here, and nearby here there's on Google Maps, there's a post box, one of the red ones, that is a historical marker here. And I was like, I wonder if that's in Wikipedia. It turns out that particular one isn't, but there's an amazing page with these ones are quite rare, and these are very common, and a lot of them are in Cheltenham, and da-da-da-da. And I'm reading this, I'm like, who the hell wrote this? They're amazing people.
Do you want to reveal yourself?
Like, I love this person or people who have added 10 pictures and so the whole history and the different styles over time. I'm like, this is brilliant. And those people, I'm sure, had great fun making that. And that's wonderful. And actually, we'll get into, I'm sure, questions about bias, questions about politics, and so on and so forth. But what people need to remember is the vast majority of work in Wikipedia is on topics like that. And the idea that we have become sort of taken over by far left woke activists is nonsense. But also, it's not even what we're mainly doing. We're mainly, documenting birds, So.
Yeah. So I want to talk about the politics. In the book, you give examples of some of the skepticism is the polite word for it, that the project was greeted with, even after it had been going for a while, and it was getting more and more attention. And the first time people heard about it, almost universally, their response was, "This is crazy." So one example you give in the book is Stephen Colbert. I think it was back when he was playing a part.
Yes, yeah.
There's an evolution of Colbert, but he was playing a kind of Republican blowhard. But he mocked Wikipedia when it had been going for a while. I mean, it reached his attention.
Yeah.
And the phrase in the mockery was, "These people are trying to bring democracy to knowledge."
Yeah.
And what's so interesting about that is we normally think democracy is a good thing, but he just took it for granted that in the domain of knowledge, this was insanity. And I mean, there are two ways you might think that argument could go, one of which is democracy is about letting anyone do it, and most people are ignorant. That's one view that people might have. I think the commoner view would be neutrality is the goal of an encyclopedia, and the one thing that nothing in democratic politics cashes out as is neutral. People are biased. Now, I think those views about Wikipedia faded over time and have now more or less, not entirely, as we'll come on to, but more or less disappeared. But how did you win that battle? How did you win the battle against the assumption that democratic knowledge is almost a contradiction in terms?
I mean, mainly we just ignored it and just cracked on writing,
Proof of concept.
And yeah, proof of concept. So, and actually one of the things, so there were questions in the early days about, I actually assumed on day one, the whole thing was failing, it wasn't working, we got to try something. And my assumption going in is, well, we'll just open it like this, but we're going to have to, at some point, have the editor-in-chief of the chemistry section and the editor-in-chief of the European history section. Turns out that was never necessary, but that was a natural way of thinking, that sort of top-down way of thinking. But one of the things that taught me this lesson is we discovered fairly quickly that just because you are an expert in a certain narrow field doesn't mean that you're the best person to explain it to other people. You may have too much inside jargon. Also, like a classic example that I like to give is in an old version of Britannica, a great literary work. I love Britannica, but the article on psychology was written by B.F. Skinner. And whatever you may think of B.F. Skinner, he had quite particular views on psychology, which may not have been shared universally in the profession,
He wasn't neutral.
He wasn't neutral. And so that work is a very fascinating object in history and very important, but it's maybe not exactly what you would want from an encyclopedia, which would be a proper survey of all the views, treating them all fairly, and so on and so forth. Now, he didn't do a terrible job, but and there was another example. This is about the question of sourcing versus expertise and knowledge. We had a professor on the site So one of the volunteers sort of wrote some stuff and had some sources and so on. And a professor came and said, this is all rubbish. And his response was, well, okay, like what sources should I read? I don't really have sources, but I can tell you every academic in this field around the water cooler will just tell you this is really outdated. And I was like, that's not a source. Just that's your opinion, and we can't verify that. So if you can't really bring a source, then, and so really there is a view sometimes said that we were anti-expertise. That was never true. That was an early criticism. Love experts, we love expertise, we have great respect for academia and academics, but the process of an encyclopedia isn't and shouldn't be one sort of lightning bolt from above saying this is the way it is. It should be an analysis and a synthesis and sort of saying, here are the major views. And it works very well. And the other thing is, I've always said, like, for that process, it has two purposes. So it's I would call it the epistemological purpose, the knowledge-related purpose, which is what I want from an encyclopedia is not to tell me one side of the story, but to lay out for me what is the state of the debate in academia, and it should be fair, and it should not overinflate crank views, but it should really show me that. That's the epistemological purpose. The social purpose is it makes it a lot easier for people who don't agree to actually work together. If you agree, that's what you're trying to do. We're not trying to write down the singular truth and take a position on things. We are supposed to just be documenting, like, what are the positions that are out there. It just makes it a lot easier to work together. You know, my classic example, and I check from time to time to make sure it's still a good example, but if you think about the topic of abortion, a potentially very controversial topic, and, you know, Wikipedia isn't going to say abortion is a sin or abortion is a human right. It's going to say the Catholic Church position on abortion is thus and such, and critics have responded that, and so on and so forth. And so when you go to the article on abortion, that's exactly what you read. You sort of read like, okay, here are the different perspectives, here's the views, they're explained. Lately, like one of the big things with the trans issue, there's this kind of gotcha question on the right, and you say, what is a woman? Okay, gotcha question. So somebody came at me on Twitter, the worst place in the world, and they assumed I was going to be some sort of, I don't know what, with this gotcha question. I'm not even sure what is the bad answer supposed to be. But anyway, I was just like, well, I can only quote for you what it says in Wikipedia, which is adult human female. But further down in the article entitled Woman, it's got the basic definition, it does sort of say, there is this interesting question about trans people and about there's the social things, there's biology, there's gender, there's sex and all that. I would say, if you read this article, you wouldn't come away saying, oh, look at these woke lefty crackpots, nor would you say, look at this right-wing sort of anti-trans rant. You would say, oh, actually, I've learned something about this issue. I've learned like what the debate is, and I've learned some about the different positions and all that. Great, that's what you're here for.
One of the things I was really struck by in your book, you draw lessons from the experience, how this could apply more broadly. And some of the norms that guide Wikipedia are ones to do with behavior and to do with expectations and so on. But I think it's fair to say you are clear that the most important rule of Wikipedia is we're building an encyclopedia. And I hadn't appreciated that actually the definition of what you're doing is the thing that makes the project possible. And my question is this telling us something about building encyclopedias, or is this telling us something more broadly about what is socially possible in a world that seems impossibly divided? My gut tells me it really matters that this is an encyclopedia and that the lessons might be harder to apply elsewhere.
Definitely. I mean, when we talk about, one of the rules of Wikipedia is no personal attacks, because, you should be collegial, you should assume good faith.
And that's a good rule for lots of
good rule for lots of
life.
things. It's kind of hard to see, and this is like, I have lots of criticisms of social media and so forth, but the truth is, the problem is much harder there. Because here we can just say, look, if you just came here to insult people, whether other people in the community writing, or if you want to go on the talk page about Donald Trump and have a proper rant at him, people will say, go somewhere else. Like, that's not what we do here. This talk page is about how do we improve the article, not about do we like Donald Trump or not. And in social media, the purpose is actually quite different. In fact, one of the problems is there's not always a really clear purpose. And certainly, if we think about Twitter, which there is a bit of an aspiration to be the sort of global town square, I'm like, it's a pretty awful global town square. You go there with your grandma and she gets mugged, like it's terrible, But it's a harder problem because if we're going to have people opining on politics, like criticizing people, criticizing politicians is clearly a part of that. And it might be a personal attack to say, this person is dishonest and unworthy of being elected to high office. That's a personal attack. It might be accurate, it might be inaccurate, but that's part of that debate. And so some of the things, but I do think more broadly, I talk about business, I talk about all kinds of different things. In any kind of a group or an organization, having a good purpose that's quite clear is very, very helpful. Like, we know what we're here for, and that will help us decide. So, for example, with X, Twitter, I think if your real aspiration is to be the global town square, you might want to look at how do areas where people come together for socializing and chatting about politics, what makes them work or not work, and basically allowing random people to sort of punch you in the face probably isn't the best way to have that kind of global discourse. And so I think they could adhere to their purpose a little more by having a few more rules about behavior.
One of your rules goes beyond sort of don't be abusive, which is assume good faith. There's a very striking aspect of Wikipedia. And in other walks of life, it is often the hardest thing. So as I was reading your book, I remember, you'll forgive me for a second, when Jeremy Corbyn was elected leader of the Labour Party in 2015, I was invited to a gathering of writers and intellectuals or whatever to talk about the future for the Labour Party. Weirdly, the person who was sitting in the corner taking notes was a new MP called Keir Starmer. So you can take from that what you will. He didn't say anything. And there was an argument in the room in which I wanted to say to the Labour Party, rather than say, never kissed a Tory, they're all bad people, why don't you assume they're good people and say why they're wrong? And the response I got was, this is politics, we can't do that. It's almost, you're asking us to do something that's too hard.
Yeah.
The emotion that we feel around this makes it too difficult. On Wikipedia, it's absolutely essential that you assume good faith. So it's another one of those rules that I'm curious how far you think it extends, because on Wikipedia it does seem to work. Well, why does it work there? Why doesn't it work in politics?
Well, I think it's something we should bring into politics a bit more than we do. I mean, certainly when you look at, I've lived in London since a long time now, and if you think about the run-up to the Brexit vote, there was a real, I would say, spirit in the media and in lots of places. All the political parties, the major parties were against it and so forth. And there was a real sense of like, oh, the only people who are in favor of Brexit are backwards, idiotic racists. And I'm like, that's not assuming good faith. And by the way, that has literally never changed anyone's mind in the history of the world, right? Insulting them isn't doing it. And instead saying, like, actually, what are the legitimate concerns and grievances that people have? What are the misunderstandings that they might have? What is the information they might, sort of saying they aren't horrible people who we can just go, ugh, because they might win the vote, and then you might be really sorry that you didn't actually try to engage with people on an assumed good faith basis. And, I think, Tony Blair, who people have varied opinions about, but you can't really deny he was very successful at getting elected. He has this sort of thing he says when he was early and young in the Labour Party that, at Labour Party conference, after losing yet again, they would say, oh, what's wrong with the British people? And he's like, what's wrong with us? What are we saying that's turning people off so much? And instead say, like, don't assume they're idiots and you have to sort of hate them. Instead say, like, oh, actually, they're wrong about some ideas, or they've got grievances which we're not answering, that sort of thing. I think you'll get much further in politics with that kind of coalition building. Now, I'm not a politician. I'm not sure. I'd probably just lose my election. But I do think there is a possibility for a more inclusive politics as a strategy for actually getting elected.
Do you think one of the challenges, or one of the things that makes it possible on Wikipedia is, as you said at the beginning, the point about the wiki is it's more like a creative arts project because it is fluid. And the trouble with what we tend to mean by democracy is it's focused on elections, so the Brexit vote is a good example. Part of what was driving that was the fear generated by being told this is a once-in-a-generation event, in the way that a Wikipedia edit is a once-in-every 10 seconds event.
Right, yeah.
And the page on Brexit, if you don't like it, it might be different tomorrow.
That's right.
If you don't like the Brexit result, it's not going to be different tomorrow. It's not going to be different for the next 10, 20 years. And a version of democracy, which is the political version we have, which is fixated on these big events where you get winners and losers, is in many ways the opposite version of democracy to the kind that flourishes on Wikipedia, because the essential thing about Wikipedia is nothing is ever final.
Yeah, so I see this a lot. So in the Wikipedia world, we try really hard not to vote on things, because the problem with voting as a mechanism is if I look around the room and I see I've got just enough to win, I can dig in my heels right there and say we're going to win the election. If the goal is consensus, sort of getting as many people as possible on board, I always have to be willing to say, like, oh, could we soften this word and get more people involved and things like that? And actually, a bad trend in Wikipedia that I am pushing back against. So editing is normally wide open, but occasionally if a big fight has broken out, we'll temporarily lock a page. Not we, the administration, we, the community. There's a whole process. And what has happened is those moratoriums on editing have, in some cases, been placed for way too long. And I'm like, that's not healthy, because that gives an incentive for people to really dig in on a version as long as they can just win the number to get there, and then it's locked for 6 months and you've won, as opposed to pushing people to say, no, that's not good enough. We always have to be ready to reevaluate. The reason for it is not unreasonable. It's like, it's exhausting, right? Yet again, we're having the same debate again that we've had 500 times. People get tired of that, and they're like, could we just stop for a while? And so I get it, right? But I just think we need to say that. So in politics, there are issues. There are choices that are harder, that are really kind of permanent choices. But, I mean, I actually think with Brexit, I think we should be a little more flexible about what are our options going forward. If the only two options are stay out, stay like we are, do whatever Nigel Farage thinks we should do, or sign up for everything again and go full into Europe. Actually, there's a lot in between there. There's a lot like, okay, what is our relationship to Europe? How can we make it useful, productive for us, for them? How can, there's a lot more that we can do than just those stark choices, even though I admit there are stark choices sometimes.
But I think it's also, we can be more open to what we mean by democracy. So I called this at the beginning the greatest democratic experiment of the 21st century. That Colbert line, which is bringing democracy to knowledge is insane, I think is partly based on a mindset, which is democracy is elections.
That's right.
And you wouldn't hold an election to decide an encyclopedia entry. But democracy used to mean much more than elections.
Correct.
And democracy used to mean, in the ancient world, but also in all sorts of experiments that have taken place around the world, something more fluid.
Definitely.
And in a way, it feels to me like the lesson of Wikipedia is that it's our understanding of democracy that's too narrow.
And that something more fluid is the magic. It's the piece that can be amazing. The idea of like, okay, we have, as a society, we have a lot of different views about what we should do and where we should go and how we're going to get there. And democracy to me means, are we engaging as many voices in that as possible? Are we trying to account for, are we getting to consensus so that pretty much everybody can be comfortable with it, versus this battleground mentality, which is like, democracy means I've got to get 50% plus one first past the post in order to then rule the world. That's not the healthy part. Kind of have to do something to decide, but somebody's got to be the prime minister, and so there's got to be a process for that. But what democracy really should be is that broader discourse, that broader dialogue about, okay, what are we doing? Are we listening to all the right people, and so forth? And that is about culture. It's about intellectualism versus, and we have forces who you wouldn't necessarily characterize as being democratic, even though they're democratically elected leaders who do everything they can to undermine that kind of civil discourse in society about what we're doing. Like Donald Trump loves to just go insane at people for disagreeing with him. And I'm like, that's not democratic. Like, that's actually, fascist. Bad behavior.
I want to ask you about some of the comparisons that you make when talking about the history of Wikipedia with other organizations, other projects that face similar skepticism. So you talk about Airbnb, and I think it's easier to forget. I think most people remember thinking that Wikipedia was a crazy idea until they discovered that it worked, and then discovering that they can't live without it. It's harder to remember that Airbnb seemed like a crazy idea. Letting strangers into your home and what they trash it and then what happens. Or that Uber seemed like a crazy idea. A random person rather than a qualified licensed taxi driver is going to pick you up. Good luck, surviving that experience.
I mean, I remember a time when there was like this, in the US, I still live there was a spate of, there was a scare about carjacking. And so at that time, lots of news stories about people carjacking and they jump in your car with a gun and oh my God, it's terrible. So back then, if you pulled up and somebody climbed in the back of your car, you would have absolutely panicked and freaked out. Today you would be like, hey, I'm not an Uber, because like it's pretty normal. Like obviously you thought I was an Uber because I'm driving a Prius or I don't know, whatever, Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
So they built trust too, but it seems to me the interesting thing about Wikipedia, and in a way, the reason that the Wikipedia trust story is somewhat different, and in some ways more inspiring, is that, as I understand it, Airbnb and Uber and other similar models, two of the key aspects to building trust was building a rating system into it. So on Airbnb, you rate your host, but your hosts rate you. At the time, it seemed kind of shocking. You're going to be rated as a guest.
Yeah.
You're going to be rated when you get into the back of someone's car. Sometimes you accidentally see your rating and you think, I'm not as nice a person as I thought I was. So first of all, a star rating system, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 stars. And secondly, no anonymity. Right? You need to know who's coming to stay in your apartment. You need to know who's driving the car, who's getting into the back of your car. So Wikipedia built trust without a rating system. There are no star scores on this. This is a good editor. This is a bad editor. And I mean, maybe anonymity is too strong a word. You can tell me if I'm wrong. But there is an effective form of anonymity on Wikipedia. So to me, that means actually you built networks and communities of trust without the two tools that the equivalents in those other domains couldn't have done it without them. I don't think there would be Airbnb or Uber without a rating system and without knowing that you can track the person down who trashed your home. You can't track the person down who trashed your Wikipedia page. Trust me, I know. So how did you do it? And were you ever tempted? I'm guessing you weren't tempted to rate.
Not really. I mean, I remember, these proposals come up from time to time, and I was like, imagine if you went to work and wherever you work, you have to wear a badge that says how many people like you or not. Like, it sounds pretty dystopian and terrible.
It's coming.
I think the difference is, and this is actually important for understanding how Wikipedia works. Wikipedia is largely the actual work that's going on a day-to-day basis is small group collaboration. So whereas with Airbnb or Uber, it's very atomistic, right? The person you get in the car with, you're never going to see them again and they're never going to see you again, which can lead to really bad behavior, right? Not to dob my wife in, but she used to be awful to Addison Lee drivers. And now she's really nice to Uber drivers because she's getting rated, and I think it helps a lot. Oh, I forgot this is a podcast. She loves podcasts. I'm going to say, whatever you do, don't listen to David Runson's podcasts.
That will make her listen.
No, she'll definitely listen. Anyway,
Just
no,
don't
she knows.
mention it,
I tease her about this all the time. It's kind of fun, but basically, because that atomistic interaction, you can be horrible to someone and you're never going to see them again, and that's fine. Whereas in Wikipedia, if you come in and you're horrible, like, first of all, you'll get blocked because people are like, that's not what we do around here. But also, like, you're trying to work with a small group of people. So that's one piece of it. The other one is people work, even though we don't necessarily know their real names, although often we do because it's a community, we know each other, but people edit under a username and that's fine. But you have a stable identity over time, and that's very important. You have a reputation. So my favorite example is New York Brad. His real name is not Brad. He does live in New York. And he's one of the most respected Wikipedians, sort of very senior, was almost like Chief Justice, there's not a formal title like that, of the Arbitration Committee, wrote a lot of really important policy documents and things like this. And people literally largely have no idea who he is, but he's New York Brad. And so, like, actually, when he's a little less active these days, but if I would go, people say, oh, Jimmy, you've got to go and see, there's this huge fight that's broken out, and I've got some really fun stories about that. But if I go to that talk page and see what's going on, and if I see, oh, New York Brad's here, it'll be fine. Like, he's going to look after things, he's going to calm people down, it's going to be productive. It doesn't really matter who he is. Turns out he's a partner in a New York law firm, but so we have that persistence of identity, which does, and so pseudonymity does the work of, it's almost as good as real names. And real names wouldn't add very much because the kinds of problems we have aren't solved by real names.
Is it also a question of scale? As you said, the essence of the Uber interaction is it's one-on-one. Even if 99 out of 100 people are decent people, if 1 out of 100 people isn't, and you get that one person in your one-on-one interaction, that risk is going to be in the back of your mind. But if 99 out of 100 people are good, decent people in a group of 100 people, you're okay.
Yeah. Also, the damage that you could do. So if you come into Wikipedia and you vandalize a page and just replace it with curse words or something, it just gets reverted very quickly. Like, you can't really hurt
It's not much
anything.
fun in the end.
It's not much fun. Yeah, that's the other thing is, rather than causing a big fight and getting more likes and follows and becoming famous on social media, you just get reverted. Well, okay, that wasn't that exciting, was it? And so that matters a lot. But also, like, this is in the Airbnb story, I think, the point of that story is make it personal. Like, they had a view, they were young tech bros, and just because of who they weren't afraid and whatever. They were just like, oh yeah, people can come and stay in your house. Yeah, it's cool. We're young men. What could possibly go wrong, But they were serious enough to go like, okay, the odds of that happening are very small, and they thought of it in a very statistical way. But what they didn't do is say, let's put ourselves in the seat of that person. And so this woman had put her apartment up on Airbnb, and the guests came and they completely trashed the place. And she wrote this very emotional blog post. This is back when blogs were really big and important, and about like she's sitting in the stairwell of her building. She can't bear to go back in. She's crying because her whole house is completely destroyed. And the company, they got really bad advice to be like, don't say anything, don't admit any responsibility, it'll just pass in a few days. It did not pass in a few days. That was really bad PR advice in the era of the internet. And after a few days, the CEO was like, this is a disaster, like we have to. So they actually stopped all work. They're like, we have to think through the process of trust. Like, if people don't trust us, so they did things like they put in indemnity. Seems kind of obvious now. Like, if you put your apartment on Airbnb and somebody trashes it, they've got insurance to cover that and they will make you whole. That's kind of obvious. Of course you do that. They've got things like, oh, if you want to rent on Airbnb, you need to upload your ID so that if you trash the place, we can actually find you. An anonymous person editing Wikipedia where you can just revert it back is very different from an anonymous person trashing your house and we can't find them.
And you can't revert it back.
You can't revert it back.
You can, but it takes a lot of time and money.
It takes a lot of time and money. And so every context will be different, but like in that context, that make it personal piece of like, oh, they didn't really think about an individual person who's not a 26-year-old tech bro, but might be a family, might be whatever, Also, like, imagine if you go on holiday. This is always my fear about Airbnb. What if I go on holiday and I show up at the place and it doesn't even exist? That doesn't seem to be a big problem. Like, they fix it. And also, assume good faith, most people don't behave that way. It's just like the cost when they do is quite high, so.
Do you think one of the lessons of Wikipedia, there's an assumption, I think, in some parts of the internet that the bad drives out the good. And I think that is reinforced by people's experience of social media on the whole. It doesn't take a lot of bad behavior to want the people who might behave better to not be there. And it gives a false impression of human nature, I think. I mean, I think Twitter probably gives a false impression of human nature.
Oh, definitely.
Part of me thinks Wikipedia gives too rosy an impression of human nature. But nonetheless...
I mean, we squabble a lot, but yeah.
Yeah, and you've seen the fights, so on the whole, we users don't see the fights. But one of the lessons of Wikipedia is if you structure it right, the good drives out the bad.
That's right, yeah. What I always say about, I call it sort of community design, so it's more than just website design. It's actually thinking about the interactions of people and all this. And what I always say is rather than having like super rigid rules, as long as you can make the cost of doing bad a little higher and the cost of doing good a little lower, that gets you so far along the way. And that's about setting a cultural tone and so forth. So like if I say, oh, the rule in Wikipedia is no personal attacks, and if our response to somebody engaging in a personal attack was just to ban them forever instantly, that probably wouldn't really work very well. But if we've built a culture so that, because we're human beings, people get in fights and they get upset and then somebody will lash out at somebody. But if we have a culture that says, well, it's human, these things happen, but you should probably apologize, right? Which is exactly how we live our lives all the time. Like, if you fly off the handle at someone, well, probably the next day you should kind of sheepishly go, yeah, I was tired, I was grumpy,
Unless you do it on X.
Unless you do it on X.
No one's ever apologized.
So I've been thinking about this lately, and I think this is the first time I've said it out loud because it's kind of a new little insight I've had. A lot of journalists who are interviewing me, they're like, really? You think people are basically good? And I'm like, you've been spending too much time on Twitter. Because a lot of journalists spend a lot of time on Twitter, and it's super toxic. And it's like, maybe you should get off Twitter and go and meet a bunch of people because mainly people are very nice. I mean, even Tories, even I'm gonna be neutral. Even Jeremy Corbyn supporters, like they're actually very nice people, despite it all. You know,
You're not being neutral, you're being centrist, which is different.
I'm being centrist. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
What is the coming of AI going to do to Wikipedia? How are you going to maintain this model, given the changes we've seen even in the last 6 months? Are you going to be able to maintain this model?
Yeah, so AI, there's a lot of different aspects of this. A lot of different things are going on. So one of the first questions people have is like, oh, could AI just replace Wikipedia? Could you get an AI to write Wikipedia entries? And the current answer to that is very much no. AI hallucinates, it gets things wrong. Even there's been a lot of advances in the past few years, but it's still quite bad. And if you use it for the first time superficially, it's amazing, it's astonishing. Like if you just say, write me a Wikipedia-style article about Taylor Swift, and it's going to go, and you know what? It's going to be pretty good. And it's probably because it knows, because it's read all of Wikipedia.
Exactly, it's taken it from Wikipedia.
It's going to have all the sections right and all of that.
I mean, just to say, I noticed the Google AI overview. Without Wikipedia, it wouldn't exist.
Yeah. And so it's a few, it'll have a few little errors and all that, but you think it's actually pretty good. But my favorite, I love to test AI, and one of my tests that I always do, I always ask any AI, I say, who is Kate Garvey, my wife? Because she's not a famous person, but she's known a bit. So she worked for Tony Blair for 10 years. So in books about the Blair administration, she's often mentioned. She promotes the Sustainable Development Goals with the UN, so she's gotten some mentions here and there. When I ask, who is Kate Garvey, she's kind of at that perfect level that the AI, she's obscure enough that it doesn't really know, but she's known enough that it saw her name somewhere. So it generally very confidently writes a biography that's just hilariously wrong, but usually plausible. So it once said that she set up a nonprofit organization. This is true. Her organization is a nonprofit promoting the global goals. Set up a nonprofit organization to promote women's empowerment in the workplace. Sounds like Kate. That she did this with Miriam Gonzalez, who's Nick Clegg's wife. Well, Nick Clegg, of course, former deputy prime minister, so we know him from that world, but also I know him. He was at Meta. So we know him. Our kids go to the same school in London, so we know them socially. And she said, when I showed Kate, my wife, she said, wow, like that could have happened. Had we sat together at a dinner party a few years back, we might have gotten to talking. We could have set up a nonprofit to promote women's power in the workplace. Like, why not? And so that's dangerous, right?
Could have, but crucially didn't.
But crucially didn't. And then my favorite is, I always ask, and who did she marry? This is brilliant. So, live in London. I married into the Labour Party, basically, and it's very often people we know. So it's politicians, it's political journalists, it's all over the map. But my favorite was not so plausible. I said, and who did she marry? And it said, Peter Mandelson, which I said, isn't Peter Mandelson quite famously gay? And then it got very woke with me. It says it's not appropriate to speculate about people's personal sex lives. And gay marriage is legal in the United Kingdom, so nothing I'm saying is particularly unusual. And I was like, yeah, okay, how interesting, yeah. So if you tried to use Wikipedia now, because when you first see it, you think, oh, obviously Wikipedia's got great coverage of the most famous things, but obviously we could use more, who's the mayor of Poland in 1862, mayor of Warsaw, Poland in 1862. We might or might not have that article, so you might think, oh, I'll get that name, and then I'll just say, can you write a Wikipedia entry? It'll be crazy. And so you can't use it for that. Another question is, like, what about the competition? So clearly the AI summaries at the top of Google, we think is impacting our traffic negatively. Not in a disastrous amount, but it's measurable.
Yeah.
And
but it's free writing off you.
Yeah, what we see is it's mostly like the short answer, the short, quick question. So if you ask Google 20 years ago, how old is Tom Cruise? Google had no idea. They just put Wikipedia there and you just go and find out. Now they know. And if it's not even simple questions like that they could answer a few years ago, but you can ask a more complicated question and they will. And they're good about linking to us and all of that, but people don't necessarily click through to that link because they got what they wanted to know. They have to be careful because it does. I mean, my children, they don't trust Google AI. So there's that. So we do see a bit of a traffic drop. And it's very different for other areas. And then the other thing, free writing offices, but that's kind of who we are and what we do.
We're all free writing off you because we all use you all the time.
Yeah. I mean, Wikipedia is, this community of nerds. It's like our gift to the world. It's under a free license. You can copy it, modify it, redistribute. We're not about to sue anybody over copyright or things like that. I mean, the only real requirement is attribution, and the AIs are quite bad at attribution. But of course, the way copyright works, facts aren't copyrightable, only the particular expression. And so as long as they're not verbatim regurgitating Wikipedia entries, it's a gray area. And the other thing is, given that this is such a fundamental and soon to be pervasive, I mean, it's already a Google AI summary, that's pretty pervasive technology, I'm actually really happy that it is not just being trained on Twitter, because it would be very angry and very stupid. And so our idea is free knowledge for every single person on the planet. If AI is better at answering people's questions because it's read Wikipedia, that's great. We never complained about librarians reading Wikipedia to go librarians, you're just free writing off of us. People come and ask you a question and you just read Wikipedia, So
you mentioned Elon Musk, he wants to call you Wokepedia and claiming that you slant one way, and yet, as you say in the book, and I'm sure this is true, Wikipedia is almost the only institution that transcends all of those divides. Everybody uses it, on the right, the left. It doesn't matter where you are, because it works, and everybody recognizes that it works. And when I was reading your book, it reminded me there was a podcast a couple of years ago, which began by claiming there's only one institution left in American life where everybody comes, black, white, old, young, red state, blue state, Democrats, Republicans, and that's a Dolly Parton concert. So you're happy to be described as the Dolly Parton of epistemology.
I mean, that's amazing. I mean, I love Dolly. Right. We need more Dolly Partons.
You talked briefly about where there's more niche articles, but is there a way that you can deal with some of that sort of things, given how successful you've been? Perhaps the Wikimedia Foundation funding some original research in some cases in the areas where there isn't a huge amount of existing research, a huge amount of existing articles that can be cited and things like that. Almost going back to the original plan, full circle, for the areas where there isn't a huge group of people willing to put the work in for editing.
Yeah, indirectly. In terms of areas of the world where there aren't good sources, I think that's part of the question. That's actually such a huge job, and we are a small nonprofit, so we can't sort of boil the ocean and do that. We've done some interesting research and sort of discussions in the community about oral history projects, because in many cases, oral history is particularly difficult for us because how can you make it reliable and all of that? But anyway, people are interested in that. The other thing that we do a lot of is we care a lot about the diversity of the editing community, not because we're sort of crazy woke leftists, but because we see what it does to quality. If the editors of Wikipedia are predominantly male, predominantly computerish people, and so on and so forth, that doesn't mean that they are... So here's the example. Somebody did a study several years ago looking at novels which have won major literary prizes. And the novels written by men had significantly longer entries than the ones on women. And I think the reason for that is not that our predominantly male audience is like, oh, books by women, not important. That's not how it works. How it works is, I read this amazing book and I want to write in Wikipedia about it, and there is a gender component to who's reading various authors. And so some authors have very much larger female followings, the classic kind of example is like serious hard science fiction tends to have a more male audience, and that's just natural. And by the way, the Wikipedians are really good at that stuff. Other authors, maybe not so much. And so what we do is we are constantly talking about outreach. We do edit-a-thons. We've had real success, like adding female scientists to Wikipedia. That's a very popular, people will come out for that to go I think that's a good thing. And sometimes when we are criticized on that point, I'm like, yes, we need to be better about that. But if your examples are scientists from the 18th century, the fact that we have far more men than women isn't really our fault, right? That's just women were systematically excluded. But if you look at contemporary biology and we're not doing a great job on being gender balanced, then we probably should think about that. And so we try to fund building the community, because funding directly people to write Wikipedia entries we think would be pretty inefficient.
We listen to this world where AI seems to be taking over everything. The young are in fear of jobs. How can you Or are you projecting that Wikipedia is safe from any infiltration of AI and the companies that run them?
Yeah, I mean, people say, well, like, what if somebody wrote an AI bot and in one night it came in and wrote 10,000 articles? I would be like, well, as soon as you log in and you start uploading 10,000 articles, you're going to get blocked at whether you're a human or a bot. Like, we're used to seeing like weird things happen, and we have mechanisms in the community in place. And there is a really active ongoing discussion in the community, and opinions are quite all over the map about how useful could AI be in helping us with our work. How bad is the problem? Certainly the community is dealing with people maybe often in good faith, trying to use AI in bad ways. I'll just tell one quick story. I know we're short on time. Yeah. A German volunteer came to me last year and said, Jimmy, you're going to find this interesting. So he's working in German Wikipedia, and he wrote a program to look at the ISBN numbers for books that are references in German Wikipedia. And every book, it's an international standard. Every book has an ISBN number. And he's like, usually I would find them and it's a typo because some human had the book out, and it's typing like this and made a mistake. So then I just fix it and go on. But I started finding some and I couldn't find the book. And I would look into it more and it's like, oh, the name of the author is plausible. The title of the book makes sense for this article, but I can't find no evidence of it. And the ISBN number doesn't show up in the database. So he went to the person who was putting these in. He's like, what's going on? And the guy was mortified. And he was like, I'm new to Wikipedia. I wanted to help. I didn't know how to get started, but I thought, I'll just add some books. I'll add some references. So I went to ChatGPT and I said, give me some books to add to the Wikipedia page on such and such. And he's like, I had no idea it could make up ISBN numbers. Because if it's a human, right, you don't think an honest human, like a typical, like, assume good faith, you might make up a book, but would you go so far as to actually make up an ISBN number to try to fool people? No, you would not. Like, that's really quite extreme behavior. And so, with stories like that, people are like, this is really bad. And it was making up plausible book names and so forth. That one's easy enough to check, but we do kind of worry about that. But we're not going to be overrun with AI. I don't think that's an issue that we would have. Unlike social media, by the way, where a lot of the toxic jerks on social media may or may not even be humans at this point.
Occasionally I go on Wikipedia and that thing pops up, says, Wikimedia Foundation, please donate. We're 6 months away from total collapse. Or something like that.
Hopefully it doesn't say that.
Well, something. Yeah. And so I love Wikipedia and it's been so useful to me, so I always donate.
Thank you.
And I'm curious as to the financialness of it. There's a better word than that. Apologies for the podcast. Essentially, that financial aspect feeding into the non-profit, risking potentially undoing the neutrality of it and how you manage that.
Yeah. That I love. So the vast majority of the money that supports Wikipedia is from the small donors. So people giving the average donation $10. So that's huge. Like, that's really important for our intellectual independence. People used to say to me, they say it a lot less these days, why are you asking for donations on the website? Why don't you just get some of the tech billionaires to pay for it? And today I just remind them, Elon did donate $1 million at one point. And now let's imagine a different history. What if Elon had said to me at that time, Jimmy, stop all this begging on the website. Just don't worry. I'll just pay for everything. I love Wikipedia. I think it's great. I'll just pay for everything. Fast forward to today, how fucked would we be, right? Because Elon's not exactly the most neutral person, right? And so for me, pursuing the idea that really it's incredibly important that we are supported by the broad general public is actually really meaningful to defending that intellectual independence of Wikipedia. We do love major donors. We have some major donors. We once, early in our history, one of our board members said injudiciously to a reporter, we don't want rich people's money. I'm like, we want rich people's money, right? Let's not go that far. But I think we can say we want to make sure that donations don't in any way start to people who donate feel like they have a right to modify the content contrary to our values. That's really, really important. So, everybody, please donate. And I'm a volunteer, by the way. I don't even have a salary. I'm just me.
They say you shouldn't meet your heroes, but this evening I've really enjoyed meeting mine.
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you.
Jimmy Wells's book is called The 7 Rules of Trust, and it is really well worth reading. Next time, it's the return of our occasional series with the historian Robert Saunders, in which we look at significant political anniversaries. And this one is both a very significant anniversary and a very recent one. It is 10 years since the Brexit referendum. Robert and I are going to be trying to make sense of what it meant. That's next time. This has been Past, Present, Future.